my lessons, yes, there are going to be boundaries, there are going to be rules and expectations, and okay, there will be assessments.
Yeah.
But I want you to enjoy your time in this classroom.
Yeah.
I want them to enjoy the process of learning, and I make that clear in the first week.
Welcome to the show, Passion for Learning, Inspiring Teachers. Today we have Ashleigh Yulle, English teacher and Deputy Head of Sixth Form at Queen's Park Community School in Brent. She actually used to teach English at the school where I was a student, Alperton Community School, and we connected from there because straight away I can see that she was really engaging, really empowering to her students. And today we talk about how she really builds vulnerability with her students in order to create that connection that helps them to transcend and transform their learning capabilities. Welcome to the show, Ashleigh Yulle.
Good to be here. I'm very well, thank you, and you?
Good, good, good. I'm very, very well. It's so good to catch up with you. We met when?
I think we met when I was a teaching assistant at Queen's Park, and that.
You know, I didn't know that you were actually a teaching assistant. I thought you were a teacher.
No, I was a TA during those times, so that was about 2012, I think.
We didn't meet at school though.
No, we didn't. So I think we met through your cousin, if I'm right.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, we didn't.
Did
I
we
knew
not?
you before that.
Tell me, you fill me in, because my memory's obviously not very good.
I can't remember.
I've known you for a while though.
But I think I've known you since like college days or school days or something like that. Maybe
through somebody else, not even Shane. The whole time I thought it was Shane, but apparently not.
No, it was definitely before that. Yeah, for sure.
I'll leave that to you to do the work then.
I'm going to find out and I'm going to message you. Well, it's good to have you on the show because I know that I wanted to reach out to you because I know that you're a really inspiring teacher and you put up so much around education and how you're inspiring the next generation. So tell us more about
that. Teaching. I mean, was it my childhood dream? No, not necessarily. But I feel like in my life, I've always been geared towards teaching. It's something I'm very, very passionate about. And for me, it's not just about academics. It's about instilling, you know, faith in young people, getting them to believe in themselves. And that's why I take it so seriously, because it's not for me just about imparting knowledge, but it's about getting them to recognise the potential in themselves as a person, as a character. And that's why it means so much to me. Yeah, it's about building the person, the human being, as opposed to just the skills within the human being. Absolutely. And I've always said that, you know, I'm here to help children develop characteristically, not just academically. How do you share that with your students, let's say year 7, on like the first day or first week of term? Interesting. So I think it's really important to try and get to know them and let them get to know you as well. Yeah. So icebreakers are a really good way for you to kind of decrease the tension a little bit because they're a little bit nervous. Yeah. And I always make them aware of what I set out to do. Yeah. And I always say to them, you know, my lessons, yes, there are going to be boundaries, there are going to be rules and expectations, and okay, there will be assessments. Yeah. But I want you to enjoy your time in this classroom. Yeah. I want them to enjoy the process of learning, and I make that clear in the first week. And how do you go about, because you teach English, and how do you go about making sure that that is an enjoyable process, and how do you find it in terms of working with the national curriculum framework whilst also maintaining that enjoyment and freedom? I think for me, I've always tried to incorporate creative writing, drama into my... I wish you were my English teacher, man. I would have been so good at English. Do you know what? If you were there, you might say something different. But I do really try to make learning as engaging and fun as possible. There are times, I'm going to be honest, where, you know, the lesson itself could be quite dry. The content is difficult, it's challenging, particularly when you've got a mixed ability class and you've got students in there that may struggle to access the content, but I always try to have an activity in there which they can connect with. Yeah. And also try to make kind of connections to other subjects through what I'm teaching. So for example, if I'm teaching poetry, you know, and we're doing context, it might be about a war or something, try to talk about that, so that we're not just solely talking about English, making those wider connections.
Yeah, I think that's really important in terms of teaching and learning, is how you connect it to other subjects, how you connect it to life, so that children can take those learning understandings and apply them to various scenarios.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Talking about mixed ability groups, is that something that you have right the way through at your school, Queen's Park? Yes,
that's very big part of the ethos at Queen's Park. It's a stark contrast to what I was used to at Alperton.
Okay.
So Alperton, there were sets, so it was a new ball game for me.
How do you think that affects, like, what's the differences between that? Because obviously, like someone like myself, I've only ever seen it one way. I've only ever been taught it one way.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily rigorous when I was a student at Alperton.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to kind of see it from the other side now as a grown adult. Like, what is the difference in outcomes and understandings, and how that affects performance?
I think, to be honest with you, when I was teaching sets, I found that there was often a difference in confidence levels. When you teach higher ability sets, you find that the kids are usually have high self-esteem. They know that they're in the top set. At the bottom sets are very aware of that. When I was at Alperton, I taught a set 4 class. So to put it in perspective, set 5 was sort of lowest academic achievers. And the first question they asked me when I taught them was, what set are we?
Wow. And
I told them, I was honest, but I said to them from the beginning, your set does not define you. What defines you is your mentality. So that's one of the biggest things. Mixed ability, it's very interesting, very different. But actually within both setting and mixed ability classes, you still have to be able to differentiate.
Yeah,
and absolutely. I think people think that if you are, you know, teaching, for example, a set 1 class, you don't need to differentiate. You still need to do that. Very big part of it.
So how do teachers differentiate effectively? Because a lot of teachers find it like like a scary word, differentiate. Oh no, I don't want to do that, or I find it really difficult, or whatever. How do you go about making that process more simple for yourself?
I think it's about knowing your students.
Yeah.
If you know your class, then you can decide on what activities are suitable for them. And what I try to do in all of my lessons is have something for everybody. So for example, the other day I was teaching a war poem, and to get them interested in the context, I had an image on the board of men in the trenches. And then I said, okay, I want you to give me 3 to 5 adjectives to describe this image. So I gave an example, and that set off the lower ability students. And then as a stretch and challenge, okay, can we develop those words into a paragraph? How might these men be feeling? And then we have an ultimate stretch for those children who will finish it quite quickly. So, you know, starting off with the task, the stretch and challenge, super stretch, ultimate stretch. But as I said, you know, the activities that you do really do depend on your class.
Yeah.
And if you know them,
it makes that process an awful lot easier. Right?
Absolutely.
How does that affect in terms of, it doesn't sound like it does, but I imagine some teachers might think, oh, differentiation means a lot more workload. How do you go about balancing that and making it simple?
Again, I think knowing my students means that I know that certain activities will work well.
Yeah.
For that, and that means
does that take more preparation time though in terms of the activities, or not really?
Not really. No, it doesn't take. I mean, for example, if I'm providing a word bank, that doesn't take any time at all.
Yeah.
Little things like that. I think people, when they think of differentiation, they think of this worksheet with 100 tables, boxes. Right. It doesn't have to be in that way. Differentiation can also be when you circulate around the class, and you see a student who's struggling. You get down on their level and you say to them, okay, right, let's think of a sentence starter together. So it doesn't, it can be sort of within the lesson framework.
Of course, yeah. Like when I first heard the word differentiation, I don't know when it was, but maybe about 10 years ago or so, I was like, oh, what is that?
What does it mean? Yeah.
But then I was like, oh, it's just like what I've been doing for the last 6-7 years, which is just like altering the content to meet the needs of the learners. That's simple. But yeah, I think there's been like a kind of buzz term in education where I've had conversations with a lot of teachers and stuff like that, and they find it like a really difficult concept to understand.
Absolutely.
But I think everybody, well, good teachers just do it quite naturally, quite organically.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think, you know, going back to what you said, when I was training as a teacher, that word was thrown around and everyone was horrified. What does this mean? How do we do it effectively?
Yeah.
But the more you practice, the more you know your kids, you know, you've taught a variety of learners, it begins to be something you do quite organically in the classroom.
Yeah, I think I learned it through like coaching tennis and stuff like that.
Coaching tennis?
Yeah, like when I did my tennis coaching courses, it was just like, you know, you're not going to teach the same thing to a 5-year-old that is a beginner to the same thing that you're going to teach an 8-year-old who is quite advanced. You know, you're going to teach different content.
Yeah.
And you might still be teaching the forehand, for example, but you'll teach it in a different way on a different level.
Yeah. Absolutely, and that must have been interesting for you doing it practically as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I used to love. Well, I still do, but I don't do it anymore. But I used to love teaching PE, isn't it?
PE. So that was your thing.
That was my thing.
There you go.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us about the sort of content that you're teaching in your schools now, because you know you spoke a lot about like poetry and how you're linking it to the wider curriculum. Tell us more about what does the English content look like in the national curriculum in secondary schools now?
Okay, so everything has moved to exams,
right.
Which was very different to when you and I was at school. So you've got, for example, for GCSE, you've got 2 English language exams, 2 English literature exams. And the text that you study for or teach for literature, there's a range. So we look at contemporary plays.
And how do you go about choosing the right one for your students?
Generally, it's a department decision.
Okay.
So, for example, we have to teach Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And my department at my school go with Romeo and Juliet. And that's good because we can all share resources. But in my previous school, I taught Macbeth. And I think there was some teachers doing Romeo and Juliet, some were doing Macbeth. But for me, I thought that the themes and the ideas in the play would have connected more with my group. Yeah. Slightly less complex than, say, Romeo and Juliet.
Sure.
So, yeah.
And what do you think the future is for English teaching in the UK? Do you think that it's going to change in the future to like different contexts, like away from Shakespeare, like more modern things, or do you think it's going to stay the same, or do you think somewhere in between? I
think that's quite a tricky one to answer. Nowadays, for GCSE, the literature that has to be studied has to derive from English heritage. So while we can, you know, look at a variety of texts in Key Stage 3 from, you know, writers from different backgrounds, a lot of the texts that you do study in GCSE or you teach in GCSE are English heritage. Yeah. I would personally like to see more different texts, different writers from different backgrounds, because I think, especially teaching in an inner city London school, we have children from all backgrounds, and I think it's important for them to know what literature exists outside, you know, of English. Yeah. So I would absolutely love for there to be more focus on multicultural, you know, writers. But at this time, I don't know if that is going to happen for exam texts, you know?
And there's a lot of narrative in education, especially in secondary education, how schools are driving children to performance-based results in order to get results, in order to seem more credible and to get the right Ofsted grades and all that sort of stuff. How do you personally go about balancing that with teaching the child, not the subject, and teaching the whole child, teaching the subjects in a holistic way?
I think, again, you know, we have to adhere to the framework, and there are certain boxes that we have to tick, whether or not we want to. Yeah. But as I said earlier, I always try to incorporate something in my lesson that I feel will stimulate them in a way. You know, for example, giving the students an opportunity to write their own poems or their own you know, creative writing text, because it just takes away from assessment. Yeah. Because it is an assessment-driven regime now, and that is something that unfortunately we have to contend with. But if you give the students... Why is it unfortunate? Because I don't think it allows as much freedom. And
how does that affect outcomes, do you think, in terms of the teenagers and how they progress into adulthood?
I think it's problematic because I think that they measure their self-worth based on their grades. Wow. And
that still happens?
Absolutely. Wow. I think it happens more than ever now, because everything is about exam, as opposed to, you know, when we were at school, we got to do coursework. You could redraft it.
Do you not do coursework anymore?
No.
What do you mean?
I'm not joking. Like,
really?
We don't do, no, so
Wow.
for English it's all exam.
That's interesting.
And even the spoken language qualification is separate. It's not part of English language, whereas before it constituted as part of that. So I think students are defining themselves by their grades, and it kind of, in a way, takes the fun out of learning when everything is about a test, which unfortunately they see as defining.
Yeah, because when we become into adulthood and we get into professional environments, we're constantly learning as well. And I feel like the exam culture, it kind of puts a cap on learning, because you're always driving towards exams. Like once you finish your exams, you're like, right, I'm done learning.
I'm done.
And it has that subconscious feeling of, okay, I'm done learning now. I'm in a corporate environment, but I'm done learning, which then affects the socio-economic environment and how people perform in the workplace.
Absolutely.
Because people then feel like they don't need to learn anymore. I've done my exams, I've got my
That's
qualifications, what do you mean? Whereas
yeah.
learning should be fun, it should be enjoyable, it should be something that is enriching and continuous.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree. I think you're right, and I think that's something that we need to make clear to students, that it's not a case of you've got your GCSEs, you've got your A-levels, boom, you're done. Because actually these students may not go into academic fields anyway.
Correct. What are you learning now? What are you passionate about learning right now?
Okay, so there's two things.
Go on.
I have never really been good at maths, and I've said that to myself many a time. And when I was going to do my QTS maths test for teaching, I had quite a difficult experience, and I failed a couple of times. So I thought, you know what, this has always been something that I've been really afraid of, so I'm going to tackle it.
Great.
So at the moment, I'm actually teaching myself maths, and that's one thing. And I also think it's important, because when you're at school, you've got some students that say, I'm not good at this, and they'll categorically tell themselves, I'm not good at it.
Correct.
But I want to kind of disprove that. I want to say, well, no, actually, if you work on it, you can do it. So that's one thing. The second thing is behaviour management. I am setting myself targets. I want to improve on behaviour management. So every week I'm incorporating something or implementing something in my lessons to see if it makes a difference. I want to be proactive rather than reactive. So that's something I'm working on at the minute.
I love proactiveness in terms of behaviour.
All about that.
I think it's all about proactive behaviour, because I think if you set an environment of positive behaviour within a classroom, it becomes, and it's not like a one fits all solution. It's never easy, but I think it is understanding that process in terms of, like, when kids are misbehaving or whatever, it's like, what have I done in terms of the environment that I've set to make that normalised behaviour, make that behaviour normalised, or to make that child think that he needs to or she needs to behave like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just understanding the environment. How can I shift it? How can I change it in order to make it more of a culture of excellence as opposed to a culture of challenge?
Yeah, definitely. Agreed. And that's part of the reason why. Because I think, you know, it's easy to turn around and say, a student is challenging.
Yeah, very. You're a challenging student. Out.
You're irritating. But of course, there is that challenge. But at the end of the day, we're adults. What could we do differently? Can I sit there and say to you that I always walk into my lesson in the best mood? No, but that's transparent.
Correct.
You need to be aware of the energy
that
of your
influences how they behave.
100%. And kids are perceptive. They're very perceptive. So,
more so than adults a lot of the time.
You know. So
if you're feeling down today, what's happening? Well, go on.
Within 10 seconds, they will ask you. You know, they're very perceptive. So I think you need to know how to carry yourself from even that perspective, and just what can I do to minimise the distractions. So having a simple thing that I've tried recently, it's worked really well across the board, is giving the students something to tackle as soon as they come in the room.
Love it. Activate learning.
Straight away. And that eliminates the get into my seat.
And that distraction about, oh, I had a bad lunchtime, or blah blah, push me, or whatever it was. It's just like, I'm active. That's
it. And I make it very clear. It's on the board, it's in front of them. So they sit down, and then you've got, you know, the model kids. So as the other kids are coming in, they see that learning is taking place.
Correct.
So little things like that really do make a big difference, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. So what's the next step for you in terms of your career trajectory?
Interesting. So I recently, or a year ago, joined Middle Leadership as a co-deputy of sixth form.
Okay,
that's been a new, interesting challenge for me. And
I'm impressed. I'm proud of you.
Thank you very much.
Great.
10 years ago, I was at that sixth form, so it's interesting how life's panned out. But for me, I think I want to do one more year in that role and then assess where I'm at after that to see whether I will continue in a pastoral role or maybe move to teaching and learning, something teaching and learning based.
What do you mean teaching and learning based?
You know, in terms of, could I do something in department, you know, step up in department. So I think for me now it's a bit of a learning curve just to see what.
How long have you been teaching now?
This is my 4th year.
Wow, is that it?
Yeah, I feel like I've been doing it for a while.
So do I. Yeah. And it really kind of comes across in terms of your mannerism and your radiance that you've been doing it for a long time, and that you're very, very skilled at what you do in terms of translating what you understand to a group of young inner city kids, which I think is really, really important for teachers to be able to, because you can have as much knowledge as you like, right? But if you can't transcend it in a way in which connects with other human beings, then actually it's not going to land in the same way, and it's not going to give the children the ability to take that information in as readily as possible.
I agree, and actually to touch upon that point, I think that there's this kind of misconception. You know, you've got a lot of teach first, you know, this whole thing about teach first, you've got to have the best degree, and I'm not going to, you know, judge people for that if they come through that way, but I think that there is a bit of a misunderstanding. Just because you are academically smart and you know your subject, of course subject knowledge is important, it's part of the teaching standards, but if you, as you said, if you can't, you know, translate connect with young people, it's meaningless. It's
the foundation, isn't it? Like, I was a typical kind of C grade student pretty much all the way through, and the subjects where I was really good is the ones that I enjoyed the most, and that's where I got my A's and B's, you know, and the subjects that I was just like not really passionate. Well, the subjects where I didn't, it's not even the subjects that I really enjoyed. But if you look at it externally, it's the subjects where I had really inspiring teachers I excelled.
Because you connected with them.
Because I connected with them, and I wanted to. And they brought the subject to life. Like my history teacher, he was just so passionate about history. I didn't necessarily resonate with history. I didn't necessarily resonate with the content, but the way he created it, the way he delivered it in a way in which inspired me.
You were switched on. You were there.
History, hey,
there we go. That says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course. But then, you know, something like DT, and the guy was just like, oh, well, if you want to learn, and if you don't,
Bit
dry. Give me a D.
I'm out.
I'm out. I'm emotionally checked out. And when I was in DT, I used to sit down and do my English homework.
Say no more. Say no more.
Which is not something that I'm promoting, but you know, it goes to show that if you're inspiring and engaging and you connect with people, you can bring the best out of them.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I agree,
for sure.
I agree
and you
with
also do poetry, so tell us about that.
My poetry, okay, so I started writing poetry a long time ago. I started experimenting with spoken word when I was about 15 because I listened to a lot of hip hop, a lot of grime, and it went with my style of poetry. And I wrote this poem when I was about 15, and I've adapted it and modified it ever since, really. And that is the poem that I have performed to some of my teaching groups.
Love it.
Alongside a unit on poetry. And I must admit, it is very nerve-wracking because you at that point are not a teacher, you're an artist. And you become vulnerable. But I love that because it's nice for them to see that side of you. And I mean, judging by reactions, really enjoyed it because they see.
Miss.
Yeah, is that you, miss? Is that you? You got bars, miss. You know. But it's, you know what they're like. But it's nice because they see that there's more to you than meets the eye. And that you're kind of on their level a bit because, you know, I came from this area.
Exactly.
I know.
And you form a connection with your students, which is, you know, really, really powerful and resonates with them, and, you know, make sure that they can see something which is beyond them. And I love the way that you bring your artistry to education. And it kind of leads me to the question, like, you said that you didn't always want to be a teacher. What did you always want to be? What was your dream?
Funny, my dream was to do with writing. I wanted to be a journalist.
So did I at some point.
Did you?
Yeah.
I feel like if you're good at writing, that's what you want to do, right? That's what I wanted to do because I always enjoyed writing, but I found a way of kind of combining that passion with teaching anyway. And I mean, it wouldn't have been for me because of the industry. So as I said, you know, I'm combining my love for writing and performing with teaching, and therefore it's perfect. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
And what advice, finally, what advice would you give for aspiring teachers out there that want to make a real positive difference on their learners and on the community that they serve? What advice would you give for them?
Be true to who you are. Be confident in who you are. I always say teaching is your personality through a professional lens. Don't try and...
Wait, stop, say that again. I love that. That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Rewind.
Rewind,
So teaching is your personality through a professional lens. I don't encourage emulating somebody else's teaching style. Of course, you can take things from teachers that you've seen.
Sure.
Be true to who you are, because that is very, very important, and it's transparent. Sometimes I've even tried to adapt a kind of learning style, or sorry, teaching style, and it just didn't suit me, and I felt it wasn't organic. So be true to who you are, and have confidence that what you're doing will make an impact.
Sure.
Because I think a lot of the time you forget how important you are, and it may take a while, you know. I mean, some of my teachers at the time, I may have looked really disengaged and disinterested, but actually I know that they made an impact on me, because I'm still thinking about them now.
Yeah, like what you say to a student today still affects them 20 years down the line, you know. So that's why we've got to be really careful and diligent with our words.
Absolutely. And your actions.
Growth mindset, right?
Definitely, definitely.
What's the one thing that you would change if you were at the top level of education, sort of minister level? What's the one thing that you would change to radically transform education and improve it?
Where do I start? I mean, look, this is a lot to do with funding. Stop taking money out of the arts, the creative arts, you know what I'm saying? Music, drama, vocational subjects. For students who perhaps aren't as confident academically, they need somewhere to express themselves. I would absolutely channel my energy into ensuring that there is enough for students who are creative, because I think at the moment, sadly, we are at a time in the profession whereby there isn't enough money being poured in. In fact, it's being taken away. And I think that that's really, really damaging.
It stifles,
Definitely.
And we're in a different environment now as well, socially and economically. There's a lot more self-employed people out there now. I think £92 billion a year is spent on creative industries. And creative companies that are focused on creativity and that sort of stuff, they're finding it difficult to employ people, because they're not coming in with the creative understanding or the creative level of awareness that they need to be. And it's within them, it's residual within them, it's just that because they've not been taught in a way in which allows them to express themselves enough, they don't bloom, they don't blossom in a way that they could really, really flourish.
Absolutely.
Ashleigh, it's been fascinating talking to you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for having me.
And where can people find out more about you?
More about me. So I do actually have a YouTube channel.
Amazing.
But I'm reinventing it at the moment, so that's something that I will be using as a platform to perform more of my spoken words, which actually a lot of the time is for students.
And share your journey with us about maths too.
Oh, I will. However it goes.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye.